Welcome to Organized Chaos, the podcast dedicated to helping seven-figure companies grow to nine-figure ones by turning HR into rocket fuel for their growth. I'm your host, Nahat Kairala, and I've been helping companies do just that for more than a decade. In each episode, I'll dive into HR topics that have a significant impact on your company's growth and leave you with actionable advice that will help your business reach its full potential. Let's dive right in and start organizing all that HR chaos. Welcome back to Organized Chaos. I'm thrilled to share something special with you today as I kick off a new chapter for the podcast, the launch of my interview series. These episodes will feature conversations from podcasts I've appeared on, as well as discussions with some incredible 7 to 9 figure startup founders and leaders who are friends of the show. But don't worry, my regular bi-weekly episodes aren't going anywhere. These interviews will air as they become available and bring fresh perspectives to the Organized Chaos community. To kick things off, I'm sharing my discussion with Christie Hoffman, founder and host of Engagement Academy. In this conversation, I had the opportunity to share my insights on how HR can be a key driver of business growth and how startups can scale smarter and more efficiently. It was a fantastic discussion, packed with valuable takeaways for business leaders at every stage. Be sure to check out Christie's Engagement Academy podcast, and you can find links to her LinkedIn profile and podcast in the show notes. I hope you enjoyed the interview as much as I did.
Nahad, I love your podcast because it's like the cousin to mine, and it's a lot more succinct and calm. It's like the anti-Engagement Academy, but with the same type of content and takeaways that our shared audience really needs to hear. So tell me a little bit about your show.
Thank you. First off, really happy to be here. And I agree with your assessment of our shows and the relationship for sure. So Organized Chaos exists for one main reason. I've dedicated really my career to helping seven-figure companies become nine-figure ones through the power of HR. I don't describe myself as an HR person. I describe myself as a business person who helps enable your business through the power of HR and people. The reason I say this is because startups typically fail for one of three reasons, or a combination of them. Either you don't have product market fit, either you run out of cash, or you make bad people decisions. Those are the main three. And I fit mostly in the third one, the people part of things. And, over the 10 plus years of my career, I've seen this happen so many times where companies checked all the boxes on product market fit, revenues, profits, growth, yet they fail miserably on the people end and they end up crashing and burning. And it's really sad to see, and especially the lives it impacts and what it does to the founders, the employees, and so forth. So I think I'm just one person, and what's the best way for me to spread the word on some of the things that I've seen consistently happen that could be avoided and help a company really reach to where they want to get to? So I thought, hey, why not start a podcast, start sharing this advice where founders and startup leaders can actually, go in, listen, and hopefully take some of this advice and implement it because it has worked and I have proof that it works.
I love it. And I've already gotten value from just listening to a few episodes already. And specifically, in one of your episodes, you were talking about informal processes that used to work for smaller teams, what happens when they become ineffective as you scale, and how to start having that conversation. And before you answer, what are your tips there? I want to tell anyone listening, even if you have a frontline organization and you have 10,000 employees, you might find yourself in startup land one day. You might get sick of what you're doing and go try the little mini get-rich-quick game. Let me warn you, it will age you terribly. But this can also happen at scale where, you maybe don't have product market fit anymore, or bad decisions are made about the workforce that can cause a larger company to spin out of control. So this advice is still good no matter what stage of growth your company's in. But tell us more about how to start having that conversation when the processes that used to work are this is not scalable.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's a very important inflection point that companies go through. When you still a small company, say sub 50 approximately, most of the people in the organization, pretty much who does what, and you don't really need to know the process 100%. You just ask the person who has the answers, right? It's a quick Slack message away, a quick phone call, whatever way, quick call, however you do work. But What happens when companies reach that inflection point where the product market fit has been proven and you're getting to scale territory? That is where things become messy. The reason they don't become messy just randomly, it becomes messy because you assume that the status quo today, which supports 50 employees, is going to support 100, 200, or 300. Well, guess what? That 200th person doesn't know Joe, who knows how that process works, or Mike, who designed it, or Teresa, who signs off on it. Some of the ways to avoid this is that, and I always recommend this to founders recurrently, as well as the leadership team, is that it's advisable that you stay on a consistent schedule where you always rethink and reassess how you do work today. And what do I mean by that? How is your processes and your operation set up today? Is it fit for purpose to where we're trying to go? 1 year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, you're not going to have all the answers, right? But whenever you're looking at it and evaluating objectively, what's working now, but what could stop working in 2 months? And when you do that, it's about understanding what are the parts that we should keep in our current processes that are actually working well versus what are the areas that are probably holding us back and will become worse over time. The biggest issue that happens typically here is human versus automation in a lot of cases. When you're a small, young, scrappy company, there's a lot of human capital involvement in doing everything. When you scale, and a lot of people equate scale with more headcount, which I think is completely wrong. Scaling is doing more with less over time. It's not doing more with more people. So when people are thinking of scaling, typically, they just want to throw people at the problem. Hey, we need to pump out 3 more features every sprint. Let's hire 2 more feature teams. Well, are you currently doing things efficiently in your current feature teams? There's a lot of situations where you can actually gain more capacity and productivity by just fine-tuning your current operation. It saves you cash, it saves you to hire more people, and you become more efficient and you're ready to scale.
So you don't want to throw more people at the problem because you might just be multiplying the current problems with the current people you already have.
It's probably the worst thing you can do is to throw people at the problem as your first go-to action. There are situations where, yes, you need more people because eventually there is a certain plateau to what you can develop and produce within a current operation. And you need people and human capital to develop more, produce more, and so forth. But for the most part, there's a knee-jerk reaction that especially growing startups go through is that we're drowning in work, let's get more people. That is really the first reaction. But I go through this actually with every founder I talk to almost is, well, okay, tell me about your operation right now. What do you think isn't working? Well, we do X, Y, Z, which isn't great, but we're too busy right now. We don't need to worry about it. We're making money. We're growing. It can wait. The longer you wait, the bigger of a problem it becomes.
And your culture, if you don't define your culture, which the way the processes unfold becomes your culture, whether it's toxic or it's, very much so figured out and people enjoy it. It's a good experience. Your culture will define itself if you don't define it. So that worry about it later becomes a really disengaged, ticked off workforce who is burned out, exhausted. There's no clarity and they don't want to work there anymore. And now you've got turnover and a whole big bag of angry customers who are, being shipped products with mistakes or not having good interactions with your employees. What advice do you have for someone who's early stage working with a founder as maybe the first HR hire and they hear that like, oh, we're going to hire a bunch of people, go do it. Or, we'll worry about it later. How do you stop them and get them to think about it differently?
Yeah, I love that question. There's a few things that I usually go to, and without fail, these are my go-to every time because any company that's in this situation exhibits sort of the same symptoms. When you're evaluating your processes, document them. A lot of times, as you continue to grow and scale, if you don't have processes that are documented, then guess what's going to happen? You're not only going to have one process anymore, you're going to have multiple disjointed ones. Each team or subset of a team is doing the same thing differently and so forth. It becomes a bit of a mess. So that leads to inefficiency, maybe more headcount than you need, duplication of effort, those kind of things. So that's actually the first thing that I recommend is document your processes. And as you go through an evaluation process, every whatever cadence that you decide, typically I recommend look at least once a year as a start. But then when you review your processes, at least you're reviewing them from a consistent place of common ground between everyone who's involved. You know what the blueprint is. You're all speaking the same language and you're going from there. The baseline is consistent amongst everyone. And that's how it can become better when you're evaluating and trying to make improvements. The second thing is that when you want to hire people, usually the first thing I ask founders and hiring managers is point out to me what this person is operationally going to be doing. And within your operations, where do they fit in? So in this map that you drew out for me, right, with your process, what exactly do they own? Where do they contribute? Where are they accountable for, and so forth? You'd be surprised that a lot of times the answer I get is, we need to figure that out. The reason being is that if you roll it back a lot, what happens is that the decision to hire is typically, again, a knee-jerk reaction to us. We have too much work and we're missing deadlines and we're missing expectations. If you don't know exactly how you're going to utilize that individual you're bringing in, there's a few things that are going to happen. One, they're going to be underutilized, floating around in the organization. They have no specific purpose, which is, of course, a recipe for disengagement. But also, what I've seen a lot happen sometimes is that they become the dumping ground for work that nobody else wants to do just because they have the capacity and people know it. They just keep throwing work at them and then they're going to leave. Now, the funny part is sometimes I've seen situations like this where people like that leave and they never backfill the position, knowing that, oh, well, it was a bad hire. We should have never hired that individual.
When in reality, that role wasn't even really properly scoped to begin with.
Correct.
Which I think the onus is always on the company, whether someone doesn't work out as a culture fit, quote unquote, then how did that person make it through the screening process if they didn't fit into the company values? We need to revisit our interview panel questions and our onboarding process to catch this sooner. I don't like when I would overhear, oh, they weren't a culture fit. Like, well, shame on us. How did they get the false hope that this was the job for them? What did we do to them?
There are a few things that I've seen consistently happen, and this is not just in startups, but companies in general. One, and to your point earlier, there is no alignment pre-hiring on what exactly is the profile of candidate we're looking for and what does culture fit mean exactly. Because take any random company right now, just go to its leadership team or to their managers. Define what a good culture fit is. You're going to get some different answers. So that's the first problem, is you have people who are in the process of evaluating candidates. They are decision makers, yet they're using different guidelines. They're using different measuring sticks to really evaluate someone. You have very different standards being applied all over the place. Definitely when it's an inconsistent evaluation process, well, the hiring is not going to be as you like it, or as whoever the top decision makers is going to like it, because you have so many different opinions. What is right anymore? The other thing that I see a lot is the transparency during the interviewing process. Companies, for some reason, love to sugarcoat the job, sugarcoat the company, make it sound like this dream opportunity that if you miss out on this, your career is going to be in shambles. And you walk into it and it is a landmine waiting to explode. Something that I always recommend is be very honest about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because guess what? Why do I need to waste my time and waste the candidate's time if I tell them the real story and they think that it's not a good fit for them? They are going to pull out of the process. I saved the effort of actually hiring someone who is potentially not a good fit, and I've spared them the misery of working for me. It's going to sound like music to their ears when I tell them that, hey, you know what? We have unstructured processes. The operation is a mess. We need someone like you to help us fix this. And this is what you're going to be expecting. It's going to be a rough ride the first few months. You're going to have to figure things out. We're still trying to figure things out, but this is why we need someone like you. And this is what the job entails. Is this something that makes sense to you? Some people will be like, listen, I'm not ready for this rough ride. And people are going to be like, yes, bring it on. This is what I thrive on.
Some people will run toward it. Some people will run away. And that's what you want, because it might be really appealing to say, let's go hire a product leader who used to work at Dell. And they've got all this experience and maybe, but also if that product leader is like, oh God, you guys are too early stage. This actually isn't a fit for me. That saves everyone. Leadership hires, especially when it's a bad leadership hire, which is the company's fault. Those are expensive mistakes. You said something to document your processes, regularly, obviously. But my question here is when HR or people ops or whoever is hearing this advice and they're like, the HR person can't be the one to go do all that. They can make sure it's happening. How do they hold certain leaders accountable, and how do they make sure the documentation is good or correct?
That's a very good point. So there's two elements here, the accountability part and making sure that the documentation's up to date. Let me start with the documentation part and then we'll jump into the accountability. Documentation, for it to be accurate, there needs to be a consistent schedule that the team is on to revise and update these things. When you're using an intranet system, all intranet systems, like if you're using something like Confluence or something else, all these are timestamped.
Confluence is such a triggering word for me because I've been in so many bad I forgot about Confluence, and I did not mean to interrupt you. I'm going to let you keep going. But Confluence, in my experience at the companies that were using it, it was just a 3-car garage packed full of boxes, and it said Christmas decorations, but it had, Halloween costumes in it, and it was a nightmare. So
No, I agree with you. I reference it a lot because a lot of the companies that I worked with, SaaS, tech, and so forth, it's typically the default just because the engineering team adopts that for their own documents. So they end up spreading it across the organization, right? Because typically with tech companies, usually half of the headcount or more is typically engineering and product. So most companies are not going to have 2-3 different intranet systems for documents. So they'll just pass it on. And it's not the most user-friendly tool in the world. But having said that, right, regardless of the tool itself, it's always important to have a consistent cadence for when these are reviewed and documented. And in the document itself, mentioning when was this last updated or reviewed. This feeds into the accountability part. Something that I like to do that I've seen work a lot is you hold employees accountable to what's documented. Anything which is not documented does not exist. Now, when you think of that in a second, and if you, as someone who's a leader, tell that to individuals, if it's not documented in there and someone does something which you're asking them to do, which is not in the process, and they don't do it, if you hold them accountable, I'm going to hold you accountable because you broke process. What that does is it creates an accountability chain from the top to bottom. First, what it does is that as an individual contributor, you know that the source of truth is in this location. This is what I need to understand. This is what I need to know how to do. So that's going to be your reference point. Your manager knows that that's the source of truth. So they need to make sure that it's accurate and up to date, or else they're going to be on the hook for breaking that process. I'll give you an example of I did something similar in headcount management recently. So I was rolling a new manpower planning process. And what I did is that I told managers, this is the new tool we're using. This is the new process, document and everything. And I'm like, any headcount request that doesn't flow through the system does not exist to me. I don't care if it comes from the CEO or it comes from anyone. I'm not going to pull the trigger on it unless it goes through this workflow. It took like 1 week for everyone to adopt it because they knew if we don't do it this way, it's not happening. So might as well learn it and do it. But the process was built with them being involved. This wasn't like an authoritarian, just put my foot to the ground and say, hey, this is my word, the highway. You need to plant that seed of accountability and hold everyone accountable to this. This is the source of truth. Manager, you need to make sure that always remains the source of truth and is up to date. And that is how we make sure that we're all on the same page and the operation is humming smoothly.
I'm curious to hear what you think with regard to like putting your foot down like that. A lot of the people that I coach and that fall into my LinkedIn inbox, they're so well-intentioned and they're so full of empathy. They never forgot the golden rule. They treat people like humans. They struggle to come across or command respect at moments where it matters. And it can be very scary to stand up to and belly up to executives or other people on the leadership team and trust your gut and say, we need to do it in this way. What advice do you have for just finding your confidence to someone earlier in your career to get people to take action without feeling like a jerk when it feels unnatural?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's something that I also see in a lot of HR professionals, but not only in HR, but I see it more in HR than other places. HR has always been in this weird spot where, hey, do we have a seat at the table? Do we not have a seat at the table? Are we reporting to the CEO or reporting to the CFO or to whatever? I've seen sometimes to the chief legal officer and something like that. The reason being, and I don't think it's always the fault of the executive team and the leadership team and CEO. I think HR has to take some of the blame. And what do I mean by that? And, I started the episode saying that I don't think of myself as an HR person. I'm a business person who enables to HR. That to me is the key to everything. The only way you command respect is if you prove and you show that you understand the business as much as they do. You know exactly when they throw some acronym in some operation, you know exactly what they're talking about. You know that if they say, hey, we're expanding into this territory, that I know that it means X, Y, Z to product. I know that it means this to operations. I know it means that to sales. I know all the dependencies that make the business run. To me, that means I've earned my seat there. I don't think the question's been about, do we have a seat? I think HR today, for the most part, has a seat. But what do you do with it?
Do you know what to say? Do you know how to speak revenue? Do you know how to verbally spar in a way that talks about MRR and CAC and turnover and put a dollar amount to what you're saying, and it's not just a hunch?
Exactly.
I love to say, the executives don't care about your hunch. They need data. You need to learn to speak revenue, which is why I made a cheat sheet in my community, because they don't teach you this in SHRM training that I've seen. Did you take any SHRM training?
Oh, yeah. I'm certified with SHRM, and I've actually been a test writer with them for several years. You don't learn any of that stuff.
That's a big piece of the puzzle of your power of influence.
Yes. But to continue that train of thought, I'll give you an example also to demonstrate how you can prove value, but also dive into your initial question as, okay, how do you actually command that respect, but also without being a jerk? A small example that happened a couple of years ago with me is that I was a member of the executive team at a company, and they were talking about introducing several new products in the new fiscal year. This was happening end of Q4. So I was listening in on the VP of engineering, product, everyone giving their spiel and the presentations and the hoopla around, we're going to have XYZ product and so forth. So I raised my hand. I'm like, okay, I don't want to bust anyone's bubble here, but we don't have the money to do what you guys are talking about. I'm not the finance person. I'm the HR person. They all looked at me funny, like, what do you know about how much money we have? Like, okay, let me explain. These products, if I want to go based on the historical data we have today, these numbers of products means we need X number of teams. I know right now that our teams are at full capacity. So that same team cannot build those products. So we need to go hire these additional people. Some of these products have capabilities that we don't have. So we need new capabilities, new equipment, new manufacturing, and so forth. Factoring in the timeline for us historically of how much it's taken us from design to manufacturing, one, not only can't you produce all these products, because some of them will go into the next year because you don't have the time to do it, the financials based on the number of people they need to hire, the design expense, and so forth, would actually bring us to the red. We would actually go bankrupt doing this unless we went and got financing. So they all looked at me and they're like, the head of finance was like, okay, how do you know all this information? I'm like, well, I have the same financial statements you guys have, but I have the piece of how all the people and all the resources plug into this operation. So I gave this insight, and it was fact-based. That moment alone changed the perspective of what my department does. And we started even being included in different committees that we had nothing to do from HR perspective. I even got invited to the finance committee, right? Like, what's going on here? It's like, because we have to speak that language, right? Assuming you have that in place, you have made a mark, you have shown that you have earned that seat at the table, you bring value to it. You need to approach any kind of demand from anyone in the organization by showing how this is not only beneficial to you and the company, but also beneficial to them. Because although we don't like to admit this, we are all selfish beings at the end of the day. We are always going to think of what's in it for me. How does this make my life easier or my life better? What's in it for me in that headcount planning was that, hey, would you rather rely on finance to give you a report for your spend with a 2-week, 3-week delay, or would you rather have it just in time, whenever you want it, at your fingertips, without asking anyone? Of course, I like the second option. Like, there you go. That gives you the second option. We've had managers also before say, well, I'll go to a manager and tell them, do you know that your direct report, Jennifer, asked for 3 headcount? Like, I didn't know that. How come? Like, she didn't talk to me about it. Like, well, this platform tells you, because this way she can request headcount before it goes through you, and you green light it. So you're now in full control. You have full visibility. You have full accountability over your team. So win for you, win for me, win for the company. That triangle of win-win-win, you, me, company, is usually what sells you on any kind of demand. Any one of these which is missing, and you're going to have a harder time to really get something to go through and people having smiles on their faces.
Can you say if there was ever a time in your career where you said the right thing and you tried to stop something or change the perspective and it blew up in your face and an executive got really upset with you? Because all of this sounds really great, but I think it's also helpful to hear, like, sometimes some people aren't ready to hear it, you know?
It does. And I think that's a good point. That happens more often than not, to be honest. The times where I've personally gone through situations where I get the funny eye, or I've even had an executive yell at me before because of an idea that I gave. And you're going to probably laugh at this idea, but I thought that it was the best idea for them to step down because they were not. So it wasn't, this is probably an extreme example, but generally speaking, when that happens, I like to lead with the evidence behind my reasoning for recommending that decision. I don't like using opinion without backing it up with something. If I don't have evidence, typically my first go-to is internal evidence of historical data from the company, because that to me always has more credibility than something you get from an external party or third party, because the first argument you get, well, our company's different. So my first go-to is, okay, what are the data points, or what is the evidence that is telling me we need to do this, and why am I recommending this specific recommendation? And typically I don't go with one recommendation. I go with options. Like, hey, this is the one I think we should go with. Here are the pros and cons. These are other options we can go with, but this is what I think, and this is why I favor it. So I usually don't like to force a decision. I like to give a recommendation, but also have them give me an indication as to where they're leaning. And of course, I base this off of my understanding of what they're looking for, what's interesting to them, and what they value as well. Now, if it blows up in my face typically, or it's frowned upon, basically what I recommend is the following. And I don't take it personally because, no one has to agree with me every single time. And I don't think people typically at the executive level, they have to have that mindset to function in that role, because you're going to hear more no's than you're going to hear yeses. But what I tell them to, and what I do myself, is that I accept what the decision is. But what I do is I challenge typically the CEO or the executive. I'm like, hey, we're going to do it your way. If it doesn't work, can we at least commit to trying my way and then seeing if that works? If not, hey, I'll take a step back and then let's look at another direction. But I think we owe it to ourselves to, hey, and you're the decision maker here, but I think there's validity and truth to what I'm recommending because I'm backing it up with specific evidence that I think is valid and generally should be valid. So can we go with that approach? More times than not, they will agree to it. Now, sometimes they'll forget they ever agreed to it. That's another story, right? But generally, that's kind of how I like to approach these things, because you got to make sure that you maintain that relationship. This is one situation you're dealing with. There's many others where you're going to have agreement on. There's many others you're going to have a conflict on. You want to make sure that there's trust and there's respect between both parties. And regardless of whether, hey, I might have the best idea in the world and people think it's a joke, that's fine, right? Move on to the next one. How do I add value with the other decision, with the next thing?
I think it's just so helpful to hear that to you, who made it sound so rosy and great and easy, like, oh, I've got data, I think like a business person. It doesn't always go the way exactly you want it to. And most often it doesn't. And you kind of summarized and saved everyone from having to read a bunch of self-help books on the power of influence. You give choices, you learn more about where their head is at. And then you may even document yourself. They did say yes. And they said, if this fails, that we can try it my way. You may need to set a reminder in your calendar or your Slack, make it private so that you don't forget too. But it's helpful to hear someone like you hasn't always gotten their way necessarily. And I had a post today on LinkedIn about how an executive used to scream at me. And so I think the message is not that that's normal and that that's okay, but it's always better to say what you're thinking and figure out your power of influence as you go through your career than to always worry about stepping into your power and wondering what's going to happen. You're never going to grow those skills of influence if you don't do the brave thing. And I've been fired before. It doesn't happen every time, but I think about it later. I'm like, I didn't want to work at that company if they weren't willing to hear that. To whatever level everyone wants to take their superpower of empathy, don't get steamrolled by an executive who says no and is a little bit scary about it. Relationship build, figure out where their head's at, give them options, use data, but don't be afraid to stand up and learn how to, I call it verbally sparring. I think that's the best metaphor to use there. You don't have to be seen as mean or a jerk. It's a skill you must have if you're going to be the CHRO or the VP of people that, you're always dreaming of becoming.
Yeah, sorry. And I always think I put myself in a mindset that, it is a very tough job being the head of the organization. It's not easy, right? Everyone's looking to you for direction. Everyone's looking for expectation. A lot of times I think we assume that the CEO or the head of the organization, the founder, whoever it is, they have all the answers and they're confident in it. That is so far from the truth. Having been so close to many founders and CEOs before, they're as vulnerable as the next person in the organization. They don't have all the answers. I mean, I'll go a step to say that the really good CEOs and executives and heads of companies, they surround themselves with people who plug in the gaps where they don't have the answers, who they can lean on to. But of course, even with that, even with any evidence and data you give them, sometimes there is a decision that's being made for reasons you might understand or might not understand. And you have to accept that, because at the end of the day, you don't know what that person's going through and what else they have on their plate, or maybe are there any inputs to that decision that you're not privy to. Those are things you need to keep in mind. So I never take it personally, because I know there's many situations where I actually did agree with me. There's going to be this situation, many others where they're going to say no. That's really how business runs.
Yeah, I love that perspective. And I just want to round this out with everyone to obviously check out your show, because you have the most easygoing voice to listen to while you're giving very actionable advice. But I want to ask you a couple rapid fire questions and just get like your quick answer. If you could go back and give advice to yourself 10 years ago as you're getting started in your career, I know you've not always been in HR, but what advice would you have given yourself?
I would have probably given myself the advice of jumping into entrepreneurship earlier in my career, because I think the amount of things I've learned as a business owner, I've done entrepreneurship for 13 years now. I've learned, I think, multiple careers worth of information and things, because I reflect on my time as an employee versus my time as an entrepreneur. The learning curve is much more steep, but the number of things I learned and the experiences I gained have given me so much firepower and so much knowledge and so much confidence in doing things that I would probably never done. And it's given me that entrepreneurship mindset, not the employee mindset where I'm just boxing myself into my job description and always, worried about the risk and so forth. That's, I think, the biggest advice I would give myself, because I used to be a scared, vulnerable professional early on in my career and very careful, very risk averse. I am far away from that right now, and I wish I had done it sooner.
I'm with you on that one. I was also very skittish, very anxious, very twisted up in knots over who am I? And it takes a while to become your most authentic self at work and step into your power. But I'm with you. I'm in founder mode right now, and I'm learning a ton, and I wish I would have done this a lot sooner. Not that it's for everyone, but do you have a favorite book that you would recommend? Business book, personal, whatever.
One is Work Rules by Laszlo Bock, who used to be the chief HR officer at Google. I think it's such an enlightening book because I love the experience he lays out of actually starting that function and how they evolved it over time to become really making HR a science and such an enabler to the success of Google, which is, this global conglomerate. I think there's a lot of strategic and even tactical learnings you can get from that book. It's the first one I recommend to anyone who's in the function or who gets to it. The second book is Remote by Jason Fried, who is the founder of Basecamp. And David, I think Heinemeier, his last name was his co-founder. And apologies to David if I got his name wrong. I love that book and I love that organization and those folks because to me, I think they are one of the pioneers of remote work. They started it 20-something years ago when, some companies had dial-up modems still. I think it's a book that takes you through the benefits of remote work, how to do it properly, and the pitfalls of doing it incorrectly. And it makes a very strong argument for it's really about how you decide to work, not where you work. And that is something that I personally preach a lot about. And having taken companies in office to hybrid to remote and others, everything they say in that book, I have personally experienced happen, especially in today's workforce, in today's economy, especially for founders and startups who are still trying to figure out, hey, do we work in office? Do we work remote and so forth? That book, Remote, I think is amazing to read.
Probably a good one just to read to be prepared for return to office conversations.
Yeah, that's another episode.
Yeah, I have a whole script in my community that's like getting to the root of like, what is this really about? Hold on. We don't just want everyone to be burned out and upset, but now in an expensive office.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons, I think, but yeah, it's a very interesting one. And I think, sorry to go off on a tangent here about this, but return to office is one of those things which I personally think, especially those companies who are rolling back their remote work policies, I don't think they know anything about the impact of remote versus hybrid. And they're just making a decision because that's what we're used to. When you've invested these millions in office space and setting them up, right? Rolling that back. And when you have your whole workplace set up for the physical workspace, it's so disruptive, especially when you're a larger company, to pivot to remote completely. Now, there's the argument where, okay, well, these are sunken costs. I already spent them. I'm going to continue spending them, or should I move today? To the point made in Remote in that book, it's not really about where you're working. Is your way of working adapted to remote or office or so forth? Because, what happened in COVID? We just transplanted office culture and office workspace and office operations to Zoom. Endless useless meetings, broken operations, everything has to be synchronous, not asynchronous. And, we can go on and on. So it's really more about how do we decide to work together and what model fits us.
If the processes that worked a couple employees ago, if we're not keeping up with documentation and how is the work getting done as you scale and things are spinning out of control and you think forcing everyone to go into a building will fix it, you're just going to get a really pissed off workforce that has to pay for daycare, and they're going to spend so much company time talking to each other about how angry they are about how this changes their whole routine. And the processes and the documentation and the way the work gets done and the way information is relayed is still broken. And someone still needs to go fix that. You've just now added on a whole layer of basic employee emotion, which is just like hardcore resentment. And that will gum up your productivity engine for months, if not years later. And like the biggest, for my quick tangent, is like the companies that are asking their employees, do you want to go back in the office? And they say no. And they're like, cool, we're doing it anyway.
And the cherry on top is they go to the office and get on Zoom calls with each other.
100%. Yep. Yeah. Like mic drop. It's goofy. It's bad business. And it's, there's a script in my community to help have those very passionate conversations, because that is one I think that can easily go off the rails and can turn into it can go from debate to argument pretty quickly with an executive. So this was a treasure trove of helpful information and has only scratched the surface of the conversations I know we'll continue to have. But I'm going to apply the pressure, even though I just sent you the invite, but Nahed is in the community. He has been invited into Engagement Academy. So maybe we will see him from time and time again in the office hours and responding to some of your comments. So check your email, Nahed. You've been invited.
I did. I actually saw it right before this recording, and no, you can count on me to be there. And I look forward to having some of these valuable conversations with our peers. So thank you for the invitation, and looking forward to it for sure.
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate you. The show appreciates you, and the community that hasn't met you yet is going to be so excited to meet you after listening to this episode. So thank you for coming on. And everyone go listen to Organized Chaos. And Nahed, we'll have you on again to talk about all the other stuff that gets us all passionate and excited.
Yes.
All right. Take care, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you, you too.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a review wherever you get your podcasts. This will help me spread the word about Organized Chaos and keep the show going. If you have any questions or topics you'd like to suggest for the show, please send me an email to hello@organizedchaos.fyi. For more content and resources, make sure to check out the website at organizedchaos.fyi. See you on the next one.